Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I was sure I'd felt fear before. It's difficult to say that now. Whatever I called fear back then was just a shallow imitation of what I'm experiencing here. Tied to a splintered chair under a single overhead lamp, opposite a woman who calls herself Warden. Light flickers across the canvas walls, throwing erratic shapes on the ground. I can't recall how I got here in exact detail. My memory refuses to line up like neat footprints. Instead, I see flashes. A stretch of highway near Charlotte, littered with abandoned cars. The lifeless stare of someone who should have stayed down but didn't. That makeshift fence, ringed with barbed wire and guards, leading me into a place they labeled a quarantine camp 54. Now I sit, bandaged at the elbow where my right arm once was. I don't remember the moment it disappeared, only the aftermath. Numbness or perhaps shock shielded me at first. Now both have worn off. When I glance to my side, I expect to see my hand. Instead, there's only stiff gauze and a stained piece of shirt tied just above the joint. A woman sits across the table, calm. She pages through a half-filled notebook. Every so often, she glances up at me. Her gaze holds neither kindness nor outright malice, only a detached interest, the same way a scientist might watch a lab subject. I catch traces of her former life in her posture, shoulders squared like she used to tower above rows of caged souls, demanding discipline with a single glare. She sets the pen down and waits. My back aches, my thoughts drift. This interrogation feels more like a private exhibit. She wants to hear my story, to take it down as if it justifies what she's doing here. Maybe it entertains her. Maybe it's a piece of her old life. The one where she oversaw cell blocks and wrote reports on inmates with no chance of leaving. I close my eyes and let a slow breath pass. The stench in the tent, acrid disinfectant and stale sweat, makes that a mistake. I open them again and look at her. She gives a slight tilt of the head, a silent command to speak. The memories tumble out of order, like a deck of cards dropped on the floor. But she doesn't care about chronology. She wants every dark detail, every regret, as though each will nourish her authority. So I begin my account, haltingly, with the knowledge that once my words run dry, I'll have to face whatever final plan she's devised. I've seen enough to know there won't be mercy, only the looming question of how much blood this quarantine camp still demands. My name is Derek Hayes. Before the outbreak, I was just an average guy in Charlotte, North Carolina, pushing 30. I worked at Sweeney's Auto Repair near the intersection of Wilkinson Boulevard and Old Dowd Road. Grease-stained coveralls, a pair of well-worn gloves, and a daily routine that I never expected to change. My wife Melanie and our daughter Claire made up my entire world outside the shop. We had a modest rental house in the Montclair South area, a fenced backyard, a dog named Rusty who chased squirrels. Life was simple, and like so many others, I assumed it would stay that way. But I remember hearing the first scattered reports of some new illness on the radio. A few hospitalizations in Wilmington. A rumor of a bizarre infection in Columbia, South Carolina. The local news anchors referred to it as the barricade flu, or the rally plague, depending on the station. Government press releases called it infective mobilization syndrome. That official name eventually vanished when everything spiraled out of control. My extended family lived a couple hours away in Greenville. We used to visit them for weekend barbecues. When the news turned ominous, stories of infected individuals displaying unusual aggression, of entire hospital wings shutting down, my parents insisted we stay put in Charlotte. They believed the authorities had everything under control. I believed it too for a while. Then a wave of panic set in. Talk radio turned frantic. Federal advisories recommended families shelter in place unless directed otherwise. They mentioned quarantines in larger urban areas. National Guard trucks rolled through the streets, establishing checkpoints. Melanie and I debated whether to flee or wait it out. We ended up trying to stay home. We stocked canned goods, nailed planks over the windows, like we'd seen people do in hurricane prep. But this wasn't a storm that would pass. It only grew worse. We saw the turning point firsthand. It happened about 2 weeks after the earliest media coverage. One afternoon, I was in the backyard patching up the fence. Neighbors started running onto the street, some shouting, some too stunned to speak. A few blocks away, something was moving erratically among the parked cars. Someone, but not someone. Later, I learned many different names for them. The restless, the shriekers, the twisted, even the dreaded ragers. But at that time, I just knew I was looking at a neighbor from a few houses down, who should have been lying in a hospital bed with a fever, not roaming the street with a blank stare. He was missing something, any spark of recognition, any normal hint of humanity. Melanie called to me quietly from the porch. We locked ourselves inside with Claire. We hoped it was a one-time event, but soon, entire groups of these restless began appearing. Police sirens echoed. Fire trucks rumbled by. The sky over Charlotte turned grey with plumes of smoke from who knows where. Helicopters droned overhead, proclaiming evacuation routes that were already congested or blocked. Within a matter of days, we saw newscasters refer to the phenomenon by a word I never thought I'd hear in real life: zombie. But not everyone turned into the same type. Some were slow, wandering in a daze, while others had bursts of speed or shrill vocalizations. The press tried labeling them as variants A, B, and C, but we everyday survivors just made up terms: stumblers, shriekers, ravagers, gliders, and so on. When the National Guard presence in Charlotte pulled back, we decided it was time to leave. We loaded up the family SUV with what supplies we had. Our plan was to check on my parents in Greenville, then drive west toward the mountains, seeking refuge in the less populated areas. That first night on the road was chaos. Freeways choked with abandoned vehicles, collisions on the ramps, dazed survivors wandering aimlessly. Despite everything, we pressed on. We never made it to Greenville. Halfway down I-85, traffic was at a complete standstill. Vehicles had run out of gas or been barricaded by some attempt at a roadblock. We decided to cut across side roads near Gaffney, hoping to circumvent the jams. But the infected were there too, roaming rural areas, presumably following fleeing crowds. We found momentary refuge in a church. An older couple let us and a few other travelers stay in the basement. By candlelight, I tried to comfort Claire, who was too young to process why we were on the run, why we couldn't just call the police. That night we heard commotion outside. The infected got in. The basement door wasn't secure enough. I still can't articulate what I saw. The older couple didn't survive. Melanie and I managed to grab Claire, push our way through a rear window, and sprint off into the dark. We abandoned what little we had, even the SUV. The next morning, the roads were thick with rotting debris and more infected. Some vehicles sat half-submerged in ditches. We tried to move north, hoping we could circle back to Charlotte eventually. But each day brought more grim encounters: hungry faces behind broken windows, store owners brandishing shotguns to scare off looters, the infected staggering in silent pursuit. The tension never subsided. 2 weeks into our escape, resources ran low. We joined up with a small group near the outskirts of Asheville. People we trusted, if only slightly, because we had nowhere else to turn. A man named Ethan claimed to know of farmland beyond Black Mountain that might have been untouched by the outbreak. He promised we could build a safe haven there. We traveled with them, but things went sour not long after. One evening, while camped by a deserted highway, we were surrounded. Not by the infected this time, but by desperate survivors who believed we had food and medicine. A clash ensued. Fires erupted in the confusion. The noise drew a horde of the restless from the neighboring county. In the chaos, Melanie and Claire were separated from me. I can't describe the hollowness of that moment, seeing them vanish into the fray. glimpsing their silhouettes as everything dissolved into a mass of flailing shapes. People always ask, "Why didn't you go back for them?" I tried, ran back, shouting their names, ignoring the shambling shapes and the searing heat of flames. But I couldn't find them. Eventually, those of us who were still alive had to flee or be overrun. The next morning, I returned to the scene, picking through the charred remains of vehicles. No sign of them, no survivors, no bodies. I told myself perhaps they escaped. Yet no matter how many days I searched, no one had seen them. After that, I wandered alone. For months, I existed as a sort of drifter, moving between pockets of humanity that sprouted and withered like mushrooms in the forest. Each pocket had its own rules, its own precarious balance. Some were well-armed enclaves in strip malls. Others were loose collectives camping in fields, trying to farm or gather. In those early months, I learned to fix anything with an engine, exchanging my skills for meals or a night's rest. That's how I stayed alive. I heard rumors of major quarantine sites, one in Raleigh that fell within days, another in Colombia that turned into a war zone. Some people claimed the US Army had consolidated near Atlanta, setting up a fortress at the airport. Others whispered that the entire region was effectively lost territory, with the government retreating west or north. Conflicting stories abounded, no one certain of anything. Everything changed again when I met Katie Weber. She was holed up in a decrepit hardware store near Greensboro, carrying a battered first aid kit and a revolver with only a few rounds left. I was scavenging for spark plugs and extra tools. She startled me at first, but we quickly recognized each other as fellow survivors, not a threat. She'd been an emergency nurse in Winston-Salem. The outbreak had ripped her life apart, just like it did mine. We shared knowledge. She taught me how to properly disinfect wounds and conserve medical supplies. I helped her fortify the store's doors. Within days, we decided to travel together, forging an alliance built on mutual trust and necessity. I had lost everything that mattered, my wife, my child, but in Katie, I found a reason not to give up entirely. For over a year, we wandered from abandoned motels to rummaged through Walmarts, always searching for a stable place to settle. We patched up vehicles, traded with scattered survivor camps, even risked night journeys when the roads were blocked by infected or rival groups. We saw unspeakable things. Communities turned savage, lines of vehicles with the restless trapped inside, farmland scorched and left to rot. And we saw faint glimmers of hope. Small enclaves where people tried to help each other, where children still laughed, unaware of how the world had changed. But those enclaves never lasted. Too many threats existed outside their fences. The infected came in many forms. Some were slow, vacant gazes drifting nowhere. Others had unstoppable bursts of energy. We discovered the worst predators were often other humans. From overheard chatter among drifters, Katie and I learned of a rumored stable quarantine sector near Richmond, Virginia. Stories claimed the National Guard there had retained some authority, maintaining a perimeter and offering shelter. Desperate for a semblance of normalcy, we decided to investigate. We traveled north, skirting highways to avoid blockades. The journey took weeks, as we carefully rationed fuel and slept hidden under overpasses or thick bushes. Along the way, I discovered the remains of old quarantine stations, tents riddled with bullet holes, fences bent outward, evidence of vicious struggles. It didn't bode well, but we held on to the slim chance that the place near Richmond might be different. Near the state line, the roads became precarious. We spotted more abandoned military vehicles. A few times we found leftover rations or half-empty water canisters. The occasional open crate revealed MRE packaging, dog tags, or old ammo. None of it gave us confidence that an official outpost was truly functional anymore, but we pressed on. Eventually, we saw flickering lights one night, across a wide field. It looked like a ring of floodlights, anchored in a circle. Could it be the rumored quarantine zone? We advanced, staying low. Katie and I decided on caution. We'd approach on foot, leaving our salvaged pickup half a mile behind. As we neared the perimeter fence, we made out the worn lettering on a sign. US Scuffed Mobile Quarantine Site, 14C. It was riddled with bullet holes and smeared with rust. For a moment, we dared to hope that maybe this was an official post where we could find medical supplies. That hope evaporated the moment we got a closer look at who patrolled the fence. A tall, muscular man with a cloth covering one eye, everyone called him Skull, I later learned, emerged from the shadows, pointing a weapon at us. A handful of other figures stepped forward as well, brandishing rifles or makeshift spears. They demanded we drop our belongings and step inside. Something about their demeanor, the way they stared, the tension in their stances, put me on edge. But we had little choice, unless we wanted to risk being shot. They marched us through the gate into a central area of the camp. I immediately noticed the stench, rancid, sour, like old refuse mixed with something metallic. Then the source came into view. Bodies, some infected, some possibly once alive, suspended outside the main tents, a gruesome display. Many were missing limbs, with arrows or bolts protruding. A few still twitched or uttered faint moans, trapped in an endless half-life. My stomach churned, and I heard Katie draw in a sharp breath behind me, though she didn't speak. Inside the camp, rows of tents in military olive drab formed corridors. Vehicles in various states of disrepair sat around the perimeter. Some had tarps thrown over them, others had been cannibalized for parts. A generator hummed somewhere, powering floodlights and a handful of smaller lamps. We were brought to a central tent labeled Command Post. Out stepped a woman in her early 40s, hair pulled back. Her posture exuded authority, and she wore cargo pants tucked neatly into boots. She was introduced as Evangeline Locke, or Warden. No rank insignia or official badges, just the self-assured stance of someone used to being in control. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She asked our names and what skills we had. I told her I was a mechanic. Katie explained she was a nurse. Evangeline gave a slight nod, as if we were new inventory. Then she waved a hand. Skull and another guard grabbed Katie. Evangeline told them to prep her for the next exchange, as though she were an object to be bartered. Katie struggled, but the guards struck her with the butt of a rifle. When I tried to intervene, they knocked me back. My vision blurred, and I lost track of Katie. An overwhelming sense of dread sank over me. I woke to find myself in this tent, this makeshift cell, where I remain now, facing Evangeline across a table. She calls it an interview, but it's an interrogation. She wants my story. As a former prison warden, she used to take notes on inmates, gleaning details about their crimes and personal histories. Now, in the apocalypse, she's revived that pastime in a twisted way, scribbling each prisoner's tale into a battered notebook, then deciding their fate based on how engaging or useful the story is. She's been letting me speak for well over an hour, occasionally scratching notes on the page. Sometimes she leans forward, sometimes she flips back to earlier pages. At one point, she asked clarifying questions. How did you lose your family? What about that night in Asheville? Did you see any interesting infected types on your journey? She jots it all down like a field researcher. I try to keep my responses as factual as possible. Part of me hopes she'll see me as useful, at least long enough for me to figure out a plan. But every time I remember the row of bodies outside, I sense how unlikely it is that she'll spare me. They treat people here like raw material, trade goods, experimental subjects, or possible labor if you're lucky. Still, I've come too far to give up. Katie is out there somewhere, if she's even still alive, possibly dragged off to another camp, or traded to a group we know nothing about. I keep imagining ways to find her, but the stump that used to be my right arm is a brutal reminder of how powerless I am. I can't help but glance at it now, though I avoid looking directly at the bandages. The memory of how that happened is fresh. The warden notices my gaze. She sets her pen down and gestures for me to continue. I do. It wasn't immediate, the amputation. They placed me in a holding area first, inside a tent with chain-link panels fastened around the edges. There was an old metal cot, a folding table, some scattered supplies. Hours passed. I heard arguments outside, discussions about a doctor's arrival. Then, in walked a man in a ragged medical coat. He introduced himself as Dr. Harrow. His expression had the distant curiosity of someone who sees other humans not as people but as data sets. He told me they were researching how quickly infection spreads after a bite. They'd discovered it was possible in some cases to amputate limbs and stop the virus from overtaking the body, if done quickly enough, but they wanted precise timing for optimal results. So I was next in line. They brought in a subdued, infected figure, one of the twisted, half-collapsed, but still moving. Using a pole with a hook, Dr. Harrow pressed it against me. The creature snapped its teeth onto my right forearm. The sensation was less an immediate flash, and more a throbbing awareness that something unimaginably wrong had just occurred. I thrashed, but the guard behind me forced me still. Within seconds, they yanked the infected away, locked it back in a cage, and Dr. Harrow checked his watch. He scribbled in a log, noting the exact minute. Then he said, "We wait 1 hour and 15 minutes. I looked at him in disbelief, but he gave no further explanation. The guard shoved me back into a chair, secured my arm to an upright piece of plywood, and waited. It felt as though they were letting the virus marinate in my bloodstream for precisely that time. I tried to stifle any outward signs of panic. Instead, I remember focusing on the environment, the crude overhead lamp flickering, the nauseating smell of disinfectant mixed with decay, the lumps of congealed remains on the floor from whoever preceded me. I thought about Katie. I wondered if she'd already been sold off, or if there was any chance I could still reach her. When the hour and 15 minutes ended, Dr. Harrow returned. He methodically directed a guard to retrieve a machete. No sterile operating table, no anesthetic, just a quick downward swing. The moment the blade struck, everything drowned in white noise. I must have passed out. I came around hours later lying on a cot in a different tent. My right side throbbed. A sloppy bandage circled my elbow. Dr. Harrow appeared and asked me to describe any symptoms. That's when I realized the infection might be inside me. Maybe the amputation was too late. He seemed to relish the idea. He'd found an interesting test subject in me, apparently. Through stilted conversation, I learned I was the 43rd person they'd tried this on, each with a different time interval between bite and amputation. Many hadn't survived, others had turned quickly. Harrow was collecting data for some twisted theory on how best to manage potential infection. Evangeline, the warden, wasn't far behind, stepping in to gauge my condition. She had that same calm, clinical interest. The next day, they marched me back to my cell. My stump was still raw, the bandage stiff. A guard forced me to the table where Evangeline waited with her notebook. That's when she told me, "Your story isn't finished, and I'm not done with you." She wanted a detailed account of who I was, everything I'd seen. That's why I've been sitting here, talking for what feels like an eternity, with breaks only when she steps out to check on other matters. She's given me water. For food, only scraps, enough to keep me conscious. Now, looking at her across the table, I wonder if she knows how the infection creeps through my veins. My body grows hotter by the hour. She must see it in my eyes, or in how I've become slower to speak. A part of her might hope I'll survive just long enough to fix some of the vehicles in the yard, or to provide more valuable insights for her logs. Another part might simply enjoy watching me degrade, the way she used to break down prisoners in solitary confinement. Regardless, I keep telling my story. Between these interrogation sessions, Dr. Harrow stops by. He prods at my stump, changes the bandage. He mutters about fever and immune response. He takes a small blood sample, eyeing it under a cheap portable microscope. Now and then, I overhear him mention to a guard how this one is different, that I'm still lucid longer than expected. He doesn't appear bothered by my predicament. To him, I'm just another data point. Sometimes when the warden is away, he tries to coax me into sharing more detail about my travels, specifically, any infected anomalies I might have witnessed. We're seeing unique variations in certain regions, he'll explain. If you encountered, say, shriekers with an extremely short gestation period, that would be notable. I usually shake my head or say I can't recall. Something in my mind rebels at helping him expand his monstrous catalogue of knowledge. He tends to end each visit by saying, "We'll see if your physiology outlasts the infection. If you turn, I'll have your body dissected for further study." I have no illusions that any sympathy lurks behind his words, but I cling to a faint glimmer of defiance. Maybe if I stay strong, something will happen. Maybe I'll find an opening to escape. If not for myself, perhaps for Katie. Or at the very least, to strike back at these people who treat life as a currency. When I'm not locked to the table, I'm chained in a corner of the tent. I doze off in short bursts, never fully asleep because of the pain and the endless buzz of the generator. In those semi-lucid moments, I pick up on conversations outside. Guards mention the next trade run, talk about how the warden is sending out a few survivors, captives really, to a neighboring camp in exchange for firearms, ammo, maybe fresh produce. Hard to imagine produce still exists out there, but apparently some groups maintain greenhouses or farmland. One conversation stands out. A guard whispered that Evangeline specifically designated the nurse for trade, along with two others. A second guard replied that the nurse was in high demand because of her skills. My pulse soared at the reference to Katie. That means she's still alive, shaken, maybe ill or injured, but alive. The conversation dissolved into jokes about how the other captives looked too weak to be worth much. A pang of guilt swirled inside me. Katie was strong, mentally, physically, but overshadowed by raw exhaustion. Now she's probably beyond these walls, forced to march into unknown territory. If only I had a chance to reach her. But each passing day, I'm still here, pinned under the warden's gaze, the infection lapping at my consciousness. I'm in no condition to save anyone, barely able to stand or focus for more than a few minutes at a time. One evening, Evangeline returns to the tent, her notebook under her arm, a mild curiosity in her eyes. "Keep talking," she insists, flipping to a new page. "But this time, I want the details about your childhood, your education, everything." She's dissecting me psychologically now, not just physically. I oblige, recounting how I grew up on the outskirts of Charlotte, how I was never big on academics but excelled at hands-on tasks. She jots it all down. Then, unexpectedly, she shares a piece of her own background, perhaps to coax me further. She mentions her years at Red Onion State Prison in Virginia. She used to oversee inmates, study their patterns, sometimes write about them in her journals. She became adept at identifying who was likely to snap, who might obey. "Human nature is so predictable," she remarks. I think about how she's reconstructed that prison dynamic here, but now on a grander scale, with no laws or oversight. She's turned the ex-quarantine site into a fortress of cruelty, where she alone controls every aspect of survival, forging alliances with other factions for personal gain. Despite the dangers outside the fence, the biggest threat is the one behind these walls. She notices my expression, though I try to hide it behind neutral eyes. "You disapprove," she says quietly, tapping her pen against the notebook. "But this is how the world works now. Factions. Survival. We just do it better." I look away, uncertain how to respond. The flicker of the overhead bulb highlights the dark smudges under her eyes, the hardened set of her jaw. She's a byproduct of the apocalypse, a person who might once have towed the line of normalcy, but now sees no boundaries to her authority. The nights that follow become a blur of sweat, confusion, and whispered voices. My fever rises, my thoughts drift. Sometimes in the corner of the tent, I think I see shapes that aren't there. Each time, I clamp my eyes shut, refusing to let the infection tip me into delirium. I still have a story to tell, a mission to fulfill, even if it's just finishing my confession to the warden, some meager defiance that I remain human. But I sense my grip slipping. Dr. Harrow notes the dark lines creeping up my veins, a classic sign of the virus. He's baffled that I remain coherent so long. One morning, he steps in with a grin, telling me I might be a slow turner, someone whose body battles the disease for an extended period before succumbing. That might make me an even more interesting experiment. Another day, the warden demands I fix a broken generator in the courtyard. They drag me outside. I shuffle across mud-slick tarps, still dizzy, to examine the machine. My left hand clumsily manipulates the wires. The stump on my right side throbs under the bandage. I recall how to reattach the ignition coil, bridging the correct connections. The generator sputters to life after a few tries. The guards exchange glances, perhaps impressed I could accomplish even that much in my condition. Evangeline, watching from a distance, gives a curt nod. She calls me useful for now. On rare occasions, I moved through other sections of the camp, dragged on a short chain by a guard. I see huddled figures locked behind chain-link barriers or pinned under tarps. Some are wounded, malnourished. Others mutter nonsense, possibly traumatized or infected. The guards mention using them as trade stock or test subjects. In one corner, I spot a makeshift pen that holds a few of the infected, snagged in nets or tied at the neck. They remain half alive. Dr. Harrow must be using them for bite experiments. One day, we pass a tent with a ripped side flap. Through that gap, I glimpse an operation table, stained with dark streaks. A severed limb rests in a metal tray. My stomach twists. That's exactly what they did to me. I realize how many before me suffered similarly. How many more will come after? I think about Katie constantly. Every new face I see is not hers. No guard mentions her name. I keep clinging to the faint hope she escaped whatever trade Evangeline orchestrated. But the logical part of me acknowledges the harsh reality. She's likely now in the hands of another ruthless group, forced to treat their wounded or made to endure who knows what. Evangeline summons me again to the interrogation table. There's a battered tape recorder next to her this time. Battery-powered, perhaps. She clicks it on, letting it hum quietly. "Speak," she instructs, pen poised. I clear my throat, forcing the dryness away. I resume the story of my travels after losing my family, the scuffles with infected in the mountain towns, the nights huddled in cold buildings while Katie and I planned the next move. Evangeline seems especially curious about the different variants I encountered. She asks if I ever saw a so-called rager, a feral type rumored to be unstoppable once provoked. I mention glimpsing an exceptionally aggressive infected outside Winston-Salem, an individual who sprinted faster than I believed possible. It cornered a group near a burnt-out car. The memory is too intense. I shift in my seat, trying to keep my voice steady. She jots it all down meticulously, even asking me to approximate how long the creature maintained its speed. Gradually, she transitions to broader questions. Where else did you see established communities? Did they have strong defenses? Did you notice any scientists among them? She might be scoping out which groups pose a threat to her dominion here. I weigh the cost of telling her anything. In the end, self-preservation wins out. I give vague answers, avoiding specifics that might endanger people I've come across. She sets down the pen and eyes me. "You're hiding something," she says softly, like a teacher chiding a student. But perhaps that's wise. Until we finalize your fate, I'll let it pass. One evening, I overhear an argument between Evangeline and Skull, who seems to be her main enforcer. He's telling her something about a trade convoy that went badly, that the other side demanded more merchandise for the deal. Evangeline states that they're short on able-bodied captives and might need to raid a neighboring settlement soon. I also catch fragments about an infection outbreak inside the camp. Seems someone else who was bitten wasn't amputated in time, and they turned. The guards had to put them down. In the scuffle, a few other captives escaped, scattering into the night. Skull is furious that the warden blames him for the breach. an uncomfortable realization settles in. Not all of these people are truly loyal to Evangeline. Some of them simply fear her. If an opportunity arose, they might jump ship or look the other way. Yet with my stump, my fever, and the constant guard presence, I'm in no position to exploit that rift. The day Harrow declares one last test is the day I realize I've reached the end of my road. He arrives in my tent with 2 guards, instructs them to secure me to a chair. Evangeline is present, arms folded, expression unreadable. He calmly explains that he wants to track how my infection is affecting my cognition, see how coherent I remain under stress. He has a second infected figure at the ready, shackled, vacant-eyed. He'll time how quickly my body reacts to a new threat. I muster a few questions. Why does it matter? Don't you have enough data from me already? He offers a tight shrug. We're close to building a better understanding of partial immunity. Your resilience is unique. If it helps us find a way to manage the virus, that's worth it. If not, your remains will still teach us something. Evangeline steps closer, setting a fresh page in her notebook. She wants to record this entire procedure, the final chapter of my story. The infected is led forward. It jerks, straining at the chain. The guards position it near me. My single hand grips the armrest, the bandaged stump pressed tight against my side. Harsh reality sets in. There's no negotiating with these people. I bite back a shout that swells in my throat. The tension in the room thickens. Harrow nods once, and the infected snaps forward. I twist away, ignoring the jolt of pain in my missing arm. The guards hold me in place, letting it graze my left shoulder, though it can't fully bite through the fabric. Harrow scribbles notes, extends a baton to push it back. He's measuring something, my reaction times, my physical indicators. I feel my mind pulling away, as if retreating from the horror. Evangeline's pen scratches. The overhead bulb flickers. At some point, Harrow calls out the time, instructing one guard to record the moment. The infected thrashes violently, biting the air. The guards forcibly drag it away and lock it inside a small cage. My clothes are torn. I see no immediate skin break, but the atmosphere reeks of rot. Harrow leans in, checking if there's any fresh wound. He frowns, disappointed. It appears the subject avoided a second bite, he remarks. He glances at Evangeline, who also looks dissatisfied. Well, we still have the first bite's progression to study. They unchain me, letting me slump to the ground. The warden sets aside her notebook and instructs the guards to watch me closely, in case I display any new signs. Harrow lifts a small camera and snaps a picture of me. I flinch at the flash. Then they depart, leaving me with silent guards who reattach the shackles. I close my eyes, letting the wave of exhaustion roll over me. Hours later, maybe days, it's hard to tell, Evangeline returns to the tent alone. No guards, no doctor. She stands by the table, leafing through her notes. Finally, she looks my way. There's a certain logic to what we do here, she begins, almost apologetically. This camp was set up by the government to quarantine infected. We had no choice but to adapt. The infected threatened our survival, and so did rival groups. We took measures, perhaps harsh ones, but necessary. Her voice remains measured, not exactly remorseful. She's reciting a rationale, not seeking forgiveness. You probably despise me, she goes on. But I was a warden for over a decade. I understand order. When you walked through that gate, you became part of my system. I recall the expressions on the half-torn bodies outside, their desperate final moments, the shapes strung up for intimidation, the memory of Katie forcibly taken. An anger stirs in me, hotter than the fever in my veins, but I don't let it show. I remain quiet. She lifts her notebook, flipping through the pages of my testimony. Your story. It's thorough, she remarks. You've seen a lot, survived more than most. Dr. Harrow thinks that prolonged exposure might mean you're somewhat resistant to the virus, or you have an immune quirk. That's valuable to us. She closes the notebook, We're not finished with you yet." I sense no relief. In a place like this, not finished only prolongs the suffering. While I await the next step of their plan, I drift into memories of home. Not just the day-to-day routine before the outbreak, but also small details. The hum of Charlotte's city streets at dusk, the smell of fresh coffee from a corner cafe on East Boulevard, the swirl of leaves in Freedom Park during autumn. I think about Melanie's laugh, Claire's bright eyes whenever she discovered something new, Rusty the dog, chasing after the mailman. I regret not appreciating those mundane joys more deeply when I had them. Now I sit in a battered tent, wearing torn clothes, my right arm gone, the infection creeping toward my mind. The world has devolved into quarantines that are anything but safe. Warlords who traffic in human lives, doctors who treat living beings like lab rats. This reflection hits me harder than all the physical pain. I try to hold on to those memories, keep them from being swallowed by the fever. If I turn, I want to at least have recalled them one last time as vividly as I can. One afternoon, a scuffle breaks out near the entrance gate. I hear raised voices, shouting. A guard rushes past my tent, ignoring me for once. Pressing myself against the tent wall, I lift the edge of the canvas to see what's happening. 3 newly arrived prisoners are fighting back, one wielding a piece of broken metal pipe. A guard is on the ground, clutching at a wound. Another guard is circling the group, trying to calm them down or subdue them. Skull emerges from a side corridor, leveling a shotgun. The situation escalates. A single shot rings out, and the group's resistance collapses. Guards quickly move in, restraining them. The entire confrontation lasts barely a minute. That outburst, brief as it is, draws out many of the camp's enforcers. Some hurry to reinforce the gate or drag the rebellious prisoners away. In the commotion, a figure breaks from the chaos and dashes between tents, apparently unguarded. For a moment, it appears they might sprint clear past the fence, but an alarm horn sounds, floodlights whip around, and within seconds, the runner is tackled by 3 armed individuals. The gate remains locked. Escape proves futile. I stare at the spectacle. Even with the guard's temporary distraction, with my missing arm and fevered condition, running would be a certain end. A pang of desperation wells up. Maybe I should have tried anyway. But the moment passes, and the camp returns to its watchful stillness. That evening, the guards escort me to a different tent, an open area with chairs arranged in a half circle. It looks like some twisted version of a communal hall. Evangeline stands at the front, along with Dr. Harrow. A ragged tarp covers part of the space, behind which muffled sounds can be heard. Several of the camp's residents gather, forming an uneasy audience. I see others who appear to be in positions of authority, plus a handful of battered prisoners forced to attend. Evangeline announces that there will be a presentation. My skin prickles at the tone of her voice. The tarp is pulled aside to reveal the same infected that bit me days ago, now with limbs bound to a thick wooden board. There's a collective murmur among the crowd. Dr. Harrow steps forward, explaining how they've been studying the creature's physiology, measuring how the virus affects muscle tension and neural responses. He sounds proud of the horrors. Though I can't fully see every detail from my vantage point, I notice the infected's eyes flick around with a restless hunger. A few watchers shift uncomfortably. Evangeline beckons me forward, calling me our test subject number 43. She invites me to comment on my experience with the infected. Through trembling words, I manage a short statement, that I was bitten, that they waited, that my arm was removed. My voice falters as I sense the gaze of the entire assembly. There's no overt applause or reaction. A tense hush settles. Dr. Harrow continues with his demonstration, pointing out the infected's decaying flesh, the blackening of veins, the advanced mutation. He remarks how they plan to harvest certain fluids for analysis. An undercurrent of revulsion ripples through some of those assembled, but the warden stands firm, her expression neutral. This is her brand of entertainment, reminding everyone who wields ultimate power here. After the disturbing display, they lead me back to the interrogation tent. To my surprise, Evangeline doesn't drill me with more questions. Instead, she allows a moment of silence before stating that she's satisfied with the story so far. She sets her notebook aside and says, "I'll let you rest for now." A guard locks me to a post, leaving me some water and a meager ration. That might be the closest thing to mercy I've seen here. I'm left alone for hours, maybe half a day, drifting in and out of consciousness. My dreams are filled with swirling images: the church basement in Gaffney, the hardware store with Katie, the bodies strung up outside the fence, Melanie and Claire lost on that highway. At times I jolt awake, uncertain if I'm still in the tent, or if I've somehow slipped into delirium. The infection weighs heavy, and the bandaged stump is stiff. Each slight movement a reminder that my body will never be whole again. It's near dusk when Evangeline returns, quietly this time, accompanied by only one guard. She dismisses him with a wave and settles into the chair across from me. The overhead bulb throws her shadow across the table. She flips open to a fresh page in her notebook. "I have one final question for you," she says. Her voice is subdued, as though we're the only two in the world. "If you had one last chance to do anything, abandon the quarantine search, rescue your friend, or turn yourself in for some twisted sense of justice, what would you choose?" She's toying with me, testing my mental state. My mouth is dry, but I find enough resolve to murmur, "I'd try to save Katie." She nods, as if that's the answer she expected. Silence hangs between us. Then she says, "Your story is complete." Her gaze sweeps over me with a clinical finality. I think of the lines of text she's filled in her notebooks, my entire life reduced to bullet points and personal tragedies. Without another word, she stands, leaves the tent. The guard re-enters wordlessly. I wonder if that was the last conversation I'll ever have with anyone who cares to listen. The next time the tent flap opens, Dr. Harrow arrives with two guards. One is the same man who pinned me during the bite. They unchain me, pull me to my feet. Harrow glances at my stump. "We're going to see if your infection has progressed enough for the final part," he says. He checks his watch, as if scheduling an appointment. They lead me across the camp. People step aside or stare. I sense pity in some eyes, revulsion in others. The stench from the row of bodies, fresh additions apparently, lingers in the air. I breathe shallowly through my mouth, not wanting to dwell on the details. We reach a larger medical tent, thick with shadows. A solitary overhead lamp reveals a metal table, spattered with old stains. Instruments are arranged on a side tray. The tension is palpable. I recall the last time I was here, when they took my arm. Harrow instructs the guards to secure me to a chair, a thick-limbed piece of furniture bolted to the floor. They fasten my legs and torso with crude straps. Another strap goes around my left arm. He hums quietly to himself, rummaging through syringes. The gloom of the tent accentuates his dispassionate expression. "I've noted your vitals remain stable, despite the fever," he remarks, placing the syringes on a tray. "But your eyes show the early tinge of transformation. We'll see how long you last." He steps aside, allowing the guard to stand behind me with a hatchet or some similar tool, possibly in case I turn. I see movement on a nearby table, a chunk of rotting flesh that once was my forearm. They've dissected it further. Discolored layers of muscle are pinned back, revealing the virus's infiltration, I assume. My stomach lurches, but no outward reaction emerges. Harrow withdraws a small camera, snapping a few pictures of me. Then he starts a voice recorder. "Subject 43, final observation," he intones. "Amputation performed at hour 1:15 post-bite. Fever onset within 24 hours. Ongoing for approximately 5 days now. So far, subject retains mental faculties. Physical condition deteriorating." He steps forward, checking my pupils with a flashlight, then tapping the side of my neck. "We'll begin with a mild injection that may provoke the infection response," he says. The guard behind me shifts. I can hear the grip on the hatchet tighten. The needle goes in, delivering some unknown substance. My head swims and my vision narrows. I grip the edges of the chair with my one hand. Sweat beads along my brow. Harrow leans in to watch. "We'll give it a few minutes," he notes. "If you show signs of mania or transformation, the guard will remove your head immediately. If you remain stable, I'll continue with a deeper examination." The guard's presence is a chilling reminder of the end that awaits me. I flick my eyes around the tent, searching for something, anything that might offer an escape. But the straps are too tight, and I have only my left arm. Outside, I can hear an engine revving, maybe an arriving or departing trade convoy. The rest of the camp is moving on with its routine, indifferent to my predicament. Time stretches. My body wavers between searing heat and cold tremors. Harrow checks my pulse, remarks on the elevated rate, scribbles a note. I lock onto the memory of Katie, her serious but kind face when we first met, her determination to stay hopeful. My chest feels tight, but not from physical sensations, more from the crushing awareness that I'm here, about to lose my humanity. Harrow lifts another syringe. "Let's see if this elicits more infection markers," he says. His voice holds an odd excitement, as if unwrapping a long-anticipated gift. In that moment, I decide, I won't give him the satisfaction of watching me turn into a mindless shell. My mind latches onto a single goal. I'm not leaving this tent as a twisted creature. If it comes to that, I'll provoke the guard or find a way to end it on my own terms. Harrow administers the second injection. A deeper wave of dizziness surges. Colors bleed into one another. The overhead lamp seems to flicker faster. My focus zeroes in on the guard's foot scuffing the ground. Evangeline's voice floats into my memory, reminding me that she alone decides my fate. Perhaps she's outside waiting for the final verdict. Another tale concluded for her notebook. I can't let it end like this. But the straps hold me firm. My single hand is pinned against the armrest. Trying to move my torso only makes the leather bite into my skin. My brain feels thick, like I'm wading through deep water. Harrow's shape blurs as he leans over, placing a stethoscope against my chest. He listens, notes the results. Then he motions for the guard to step closer, presumably in case I lash out. Do I lash out? The question pulses through my mind. Maybe if I start thrashing, I can force them to kill me quickly, sparing me from a slow transformation. Yet there's a small chance I'm not doomed, some faint glimmer I can't fully extinguish. A sudden wave of clarity hits me. If the virus is indeed unstoppable, I have only one choice left, to die as myself, not as one of the restless. But the guard stands ready. The final blow is his to make, not mine. Just as Harrow finishes another note, the tent flap opens and Evangeline enters. She scans the scene, eyes flicking from the doctor's instruments to my strapped form. She addresses Harrow sharply. "We don't have all day. The next convoy departs in an hour. Either finalize your test or let him return to his cell." Harrow frowns, gesturing at me. He's showing mild signs of advanced infection, but no mania. It's possible his body could keep fighting it for another day, maybe longer. Evangeline's lips form a tight line. "No, time's up. We have other priorities." She looks at me directly. I sense something in her gaze. Perhaps a flicker of regret, or maybe just calculation. Then she nods at the guard. That's when I realize she's effectively signed my death warrant. The guard steps around, positioning himself behind me. Harrow moves to protest. "But we haven't completed." Evangeline cuts him off with a curt wave. "We got enough from 43. We can't babysit him indefinitely." She turns on her heel, heading toward the exit, leaving Harrow standing there with a frustrated expression. A chill envelops me. The guard draws closer, hatchet in hand, waiting for a signal. Harrow sets down his clipboard, glancing between me and the warden's retreating figure. For a moment, neither of them moves. Then Harrow's professional curiosity surfaces one last time. "One final check," he mutters, leaning forward. He lifts my eyelids, examines the blackening veins creeping into them. He traces a line on my chest with a fingertip, as if mapping the virus's path. My mind screams for him to back off, to end it or release me. The guard shifts again. I hear the faint rustle of his jacket. My heart surges with the realization that I have seconds left. If I do nothing, he'll deliver the final blow. If I struggle, he might do the same. But perhaps I can force some different outcome, no matter how grim. With the last remnants of control, I muster a sudden jerk, twisting my torso against the straps. I aim to crash my shoulder into Harrow, maybe knock him off balance, but the strap across my chest prevents any significant force. Harrow stumbles back a half step, startled. The guard reacts instantly, swinging the hatchet downward, except he misjudges, as Harrow is in the line of motion. There's a thump, a gasp. Harrow reels, a slice across his side. The guard curses. Evangeline from the tent flap whips around. She sees the doctor stagger, sees me pinned, sees the guard holding a bloody hatchet. In 2 strides, she's at Harrow's side. Harrow clutches the wound, though it doesn't look immediately fatal. The warden barks orders at the guard, "Stop being clumsy, finish the job, then get him patched up." The guard tightens his grip, raises the hatchet again, aiming at me this time. My eyes close. A dull acceptance settles in, though I can't see the blow. I wait, and wait. Then a cacophony erupts from outside. Shouts, the blare of a horn, gunfire. The guard hesitates. He and Evangeline exchange glances. Another shot cracks the air. The doctor, pale-faced, staggers to the side. The warden curses under her breath and rushes out, presumably to contain whatever chaos is happening in the camp. The guard stands uncertain, as more gunfire pops in rapid sequence. For a moment, it's just me, the guard, and Harrow's ragged breathing. Then the guard steps toward the tent's entrance, drawn by the noise. He glances back at me, strapped to the chair, helpless. He must decide whether to kill me now or see what's going on. Another barrage of gunshots intensifies, and he chooses to investigate. He leaves. I'm alone, bound, head swimming with infection and chemicals. Outside, the entire camp roils in chaos. I hear metallic clangs, vehicles revving. The whomp of an explosion rattles the tent's frame. Could this be a rival faction attacking? Or maybe a band of captives rose up, staging a revolt. Harrow tries to stem his wound, rummaging for gauze. He looks at me with a mix of anger and desperation. "This is on your hands," he mutters, though I'm the one strapped down. At that moment, the tent flap tears open. A captive, someone I briefly saw once in passing, appears, gripping a makeshift blade. He looks wide-eyed, adrenaline pumping. He spots me tied to the chair, sees Harrow, sees the blood. His expression darkens, like he recognizes the doctor. Harrow backs away, raising his hands. The captive lunges, no hesitation. I turn my face away, hearing the struggle, the sound of fists colliding with flesh, an impact that topples a tray of instruments. Harrow collapses. The captive stands over him, panting, blade trembling in his grip. He glances at me, seems to weigh his next move, then kneels to slice my straps. My body slumps forward, free but weak. He utters something about a chance to run, says the fence might be open on the north side. The camp is on fire, figuratively or literally, I can't tell. He doesn't linger. He bolts out, leaving Harrow groaning on the ground and me half-conscious. Through sheer will, I stagger to my feet, leaning heavily on the metal table. My stump pulses in agony, my head swimming with fever, but I push forward. Harrow tries to say something, a plea or a curse, but I ignore him. If I linger, I'll either be recaptured by the guards or collapse from infection. Stumbling outside, I find the camp transformed into a war zone. Tents burn, sending black plumes into the night. Infected, some newly turned from the camp's prisoners perhaps, amble across pathways, biting at fleeing shapes. I see armed defenders fighting off intruders or maybe an internal mutiny. It's impossible to tell. I hobble toward the perimeter, weaving between overturned crates and smashed equipment. It's a surreal nightmare, reminiscent of the earliest outbreak days in Charlotte. This might be my only chance to get out. My vision blurs, and I nearly trip over a body. The figure groans, pinned under debris, reaching for help. There's nothing I can do. My feet carry me onward. At the fence line, I discover a gaping hole, likely blasted open by some explosive. Shredded chain link dangles, an escape route beckoning. I step through, adrenaline warring with delirium. Shots ring out behind me, but I keep moving, away from the camp's flickering lights, into the darkness. I don't recall how long I walked, or whether I crawled part of the way. My memory fractures. There are flashes of a wooded area, stumbling through brush, panting in short, painful bursts. The fever surges. I can't hold on to thoughts. A single name repeats in my mind. Katie. Sometime later, hours or days, I come to in a small clearing. My clothes are torn. The bandage around my stump is soaked through. I see no sign of pursuit, but I have no clue how far I am from the camp or from any settlement. My tongue feels like sandpaper. My entire body is a furnace, the infection clawing at my mind. I try to stand, but my legs quiver. I end up crawling to a nearby ditch for water. The murky puddle there might be unsafe, but I have no other choice. Sipping carefully, I nearly retch from the taste. Still, I persist, desperate for relief. My thoughts drift to Evangeline, Harrow, Skull, and the others. Did the camp fall entirely? Are they still out there, reasserting control? Did the rebellious captives manage to take over? None of it changes my predicament. I'm infected, likely dying. But at least I'm free from their shackles. At some point in my wanderings, I spot an old billboard for a rest stop, half collapsed. I recall the direction. Maybe I can find shelter there. I limp across broken asphalt, flinching at each step. The roads are littered with abandoned cars, some with shattered windows. A couple of infected loiter near a barricade, their vacant eyes scanning nothing. I avoid them by ducking behind a row of bushes. Eventually I reach the rest stop. The building is boarded up, but the side entrance is pried open. Inside it's mostly empty, just a few scattered chairs, a vending machine that was smashed ages ago. I sink onto a bench and let the exhaustion wash over me. Time loses meaning. I drift between fragmented dreams and harsh reality. Sometimes I see Katie's face in my head, telling me to move, not to give up. But my body has limits. The fever intensifies, blackening veins slowly winding up my neck. I can feel them, like cold lines of lead under my skin. Perhaps the biggest surprise is that I regain enough consciousness to record this last portion of my tale. There's a battered notebook I found in a corner of the rest stop, likely abandoned by someone who passed through. The pen is half out of ink, but enough remains. I scribble these words with trembling strokes, preserving the final chapter of my story. If anyone stumbles across this, let them read and understand. That quarantine camp was no sanctuary. The living can be more dangerous than the infected. The warden, the doctor, the entire system, they took my arm, experimented on me, traded away my companion, and left me with an infection that's slowly winning. I'm writing this in a last burst of lucidity. My vision dims, and each breath takes more effort. I don't want to become one of the restless, but I might not have a choice. If that transformation comes, at least let these pages stand as a warning. Do not trust the quarantine zones that promise safety. They can be run by people who lost their humanity long before they turned into any walking corpse. As the day wanes, I notice a faint glow outside the window, perhaps headlights or a campfire. It could be more survivors, maybe a passing group. My fevered mind wonders if Katie could be among them, somehow escaped from whichever group she was traded to. But that's a fantasy. I can barely move. I doubt I can even call out. I think back to the warden's question. What would you do if you had one last choice? I said I'd try to save Katie, and I meant it. But fate didn't grant me that chance. If she's alive, I hope she finds a better path than the one I'm on. I set aside the notebook, my hand too weak to continue. If tomorrow finds me beyond reason, I hope these words remain. This is my final testament, a first-person account of how I fell into the jaws of a system worse than the undead. To whoever reads it, this is your warning. Stay far from the quarantine camps. And if you see someone named Evangeline Locke, a woman who calls herself Warden, run. Because in this world, the living are sometimes more terrifying than the restless themselves. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.